It's time for Prove All Things, a Bible discussion program on the Word of God. A panel of preachers will deal with your questions and comments. Prove all things, hold fast that which is good, abstain from all appearance of evil, and the very God of peace sanctify you wholly. If you've watched us before, you know what it's all about. This is number 196. Tonight's the 28th of January, and we're pleased to be able to be with you. We're here for Bible questions and Bible comments. We got two guys on the line over here ready to talk with us, and we're looking forward to talking with you. Here's how you reach us. We're on two platforms. Most of you've seen this, you know. We're on YouTube. And if you look around on your YouTube screen somewhere, you'll see a chat button. And if you'll punch that, you'll be in on the chat. You can chat with us. Somebody will read the comments that you have to make and you'll be able to join us. Somebody will read it and we'll be able to deal with your question or comment. We're not here for politics, although occasionally politics lapses over into a study of religious matters. But we're here for a study of the Bible, and we'd like to have you come be with us. We're also on Facebook. Everybody in the world knows how to comment on Facebook. It'd be nice if you'd like us on Facebook, share the program so some other people can see it. The program is brought to you by the High School Road Church of Christ, 3103 North High School Road here in Indianapolis, Indiana. And you can also telephone us at 317-257-3000. And we would love to hear from you. Over here, but we got two guys here on the line tonight. On my left here is Ed Rangel.
Good evening.
How are you doing?
Doing well. Where's Alan McKee?
Alan McKee is off being professorial. He's got a 5-week stint teaching something in a local university. He occasionally teaches statistics. I don't know whether it's statistics or some economics class, but he teaches the subjects no one else will touch with a 10-foot pole, I think. So
I can see that.
He will be back with us in about 4 weeks. And we're trying this out. We're trying to get a couple of guys on remotely since Alan's not with us. And we tried it last week with Wayne Walker and Bob Hines. We're going to try it with you two guys tonight. And Ed here is the I don't know what they'd call it, a jokester, but he tends to send us questions all the time that are basically stump the preacher questions. And so here he is. He's on the button tonight. If you got your stump the preacher questions, be sure and call them in tonight. Ed preaches in Hueytown, Alabama. You want to tell us where?
2047 High School Road.
Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Well, you can't be on High School Road. I'm on High School Road.
Competition, right? HueytownChurchofChrist.org. That's where you can find us.
All righty. On my right over here is Jeff Asher, who is a frequent flyer with us. And Jeff is...
Am I getting points for my miles?
Yes, you are. You can fly nearly anywhere you want with us. Jeff is down in Nacogdoches, Texas, which is one of my alma maters, Jeff.
Yes, I go by this high school frequently and wipe off the statue that they have erected to you there.
Yes. I think the high school I went to is still there, but it's not in work. I don't know, it's kind of like a memorial or something. Last time I was down there several years ago.
Yeah, they've got a brand new high school out on the loop.
Yeah. My high school, is it still there?
Yeah, but it's not a high school. I don't even know which school it is. I mean, that's
great big brick building there.
We have 2 or 3 of those.
Yeah. Anyway, well, I went by there. You had a debate down there in Lufkin, Texas. How many years ago was it?
Oh my! That's been 20 years almost.
Oh, it has
It has
not.
Yes, 1999.
Oh my, you're looking awfully old now.
Thank you.
But I went by that old school looking, for some plaque or memorial, and they had painted over all those scratchings I had made that I thought would be all those cuts I made in the desks and doors. But anyway, so I'm not remembered there anymore. But
Well, yeah, you are. There's a few that remember you.
alrighty, we got these two. We had a question. Actually, question was on Facebook today. Rita asked the question. Jeff says he's already answered it, so we'll see what we can do. She said on Facebook she addressed the question to Jeff and Wayne Walker and a little bit myself. She put that down in small print.
Nah, they're all the same size.
She said I just read something in Exodus 19:24 that I had never noticed before. It states that Moses had Aaron with him when he went up on the mount to meet with Jehovah. I had always thought that Moses went alone. I find it so amazing that after being that close to God's presence, Aaron could then have been so easily talked into building the golden calf. Could someone please expound a little on this? So you guys can start expounding right away. Go ahead, Jeff. What did you say this afternoon? You said you wrote something.
Well, I mainly addressed the point about Moses going up on the mountain alone. We usually tell that story in the short version, and don't get all the details in it. But when the children of Israel assembled before Mount Sinai, you'll remember that God said, "We'll put up the boundary," and they did erect the boundary. And Moses went up on the mountain, and that's in chapter 19. And while he was there, God said, "Go back down there and tell those people not to cross that boundary." And Moses, kind of like he was wont to do in those early days, argued with God. And God said, "Go down there." So he went down there and told him again. And then God said, "Well, bring Aaron and the 70 elders up with you." And they came up to an elevation on the mountain, but they did not go all the way up to where Moses received the law. And that's the distinction that's made there in chapter 24 in verse 2, that Moses went up to the top of the mountain. And another thing I pointed out is that we sometimes forget that the children of Israel received the 10 Commandments orally before they received them in the written format on the 2 tables of stone. And the children of Israel said, "Oh, we don't want God talking to us. That's too much. And we'll let Moses do it." And so thus Moses became the mediator. And he received the rest of the law. And then God said, "Come up and bring I'll give you 2 tables of stone," which he did. And then when Moses came back down, and you remember Joshua was on the mountain as well, he encountered and said, "Well, that's the noise of war in the camp." And Moses said, "No, that's not the noise of war. That's the noise of party making." And they came down, and of course, Aaron had built the golden calf because Moses delayed to come down from the mountain. Now, to address Rita's point about Aaron being so close, well, he wasn't the first guy who'd been close to God and didn't pay attention. I mean, you think about Adam in the garden. He actually walked with God in the cool of the day, and he transgressed the law. So Aaron's in pretty good company from that standpoint. But the other side of that is I compare Aaron to Peter in Antioch. Aaron knew what he was doing was wrong. He'd heard the commandments just like the rest of them. But like a lot of people, he wanted to avoid a controversy. And so he said, "Well, break off your earrings and give them to me." And he fashioned that idol and proclaimed, a lot of people miss this, Aaron proclaimed a feast unto Jehovah and said, "These be thy gods, O Israel, that brought you up out of the land of Egypt." So he violated the second commandment, not the first commandment. The first commandment was, "Thou shalt not have any other gods before thee." The second commandment is that you will not represent the God of heaven with an image. And that's what Aaron did in that case. It's interesting to note, just as offhand, that Jeroboam said exactly the same thing when he set up the golden calf at Dan and Bethel. He said exactly what Aaron had said, "These be your gods, O Israel, that brought you up out of the land of Egypt."
You
So
know,
that's the answer.
I was reading perhaps not the most conservative writer on the subject who made the argument that some challenge the legitimacy of the account because of the similarity with what Jeroboam said. That there has been a second or third or fourth writer of the book of Exodus that was adding this in later at the time of Jeroboam. So that's an interesting point that they were challenging.
Well, in my response to that would be, at least this observation I always make when I teach in the class, is that Jeroboam, like any good false teacher, he went back far enough to find somebody who taught what he wanted to teach, and then he says, "See, this is what we've always believed." and, and so I've got Aaron on this, guys, and that's where he fell out.
Yeah, Ed, you want to add something there? I saw you grab your Bible.
Well, I was reading the text. I noticed that I think Moses went up the mountain about 6 times, didn't he?
Between 3 and 6, yes. I made notations on at least 4 definite times, and then 2 other possibilities.
Exodus 19:2 is one.
Yes.
Then verse 8 is the second one. Verse 10, the third one.
If you count it like that, yes.
Yeah. And then verse 20 to 25 would be the fourth. Chapter 20, verse 21, the fifth. And then 24, verse 1 would be the sixth.
That's right.
But yeah, I have nothing to add other than that.
Hey, I've been wanting to call you anyway and ask you a question. You preached for a while in Puerto Rico.
Yes.
They've had hurricanes down there. They've had a recent earthquake. And I've been wanting to tell you, how are the brethren there in Puerto Rico? Did this cause them any hurt?
From the earthquake, it seems like, at least the context that I have, that none of the brethren were affected.
Okay.
But they're still struggling from the hurricane. As you see, you didn't want anything political, but part of the problem is that there's a lot of corruption, and they have found how many thousands of bottles of water and other staples that were never given to the people. But there are some Christians that are still struggling from the hurricane. The earthquake, it doesn't seem to have affected them at all.
Okay. Okay, this is, I haven't heard, I knew, this isn't a political thing, that's just news about what's happening down there. Is this something that other churches in the U.S. need to help with?
I would say yes. I would say yes to a certain extent, but right now we haven't received any new requests.
Okay.
Every once in a while we'll get either an email or a letter, usually coming through Joel Holt, who's out there in Bayamon, and he outlines the needs that he sees. But lately we haven't received any notification.
Nothing new. Okay.
No, sir.
Okay. Did all that food, we've heard about all that in the news? Did they just forget that, or was that just malfeasance or ignorance or what?
It was just it was corruption. It seems like they were trying to funnel it to other people for money, trying to sell it, and then other things, they were just forgot about it.
Huh. Brother. Well, we'll leave it at that. What you got over there, Engineer Dave?
All right. We have several little questions. Starting with Brian. If I can do this. Let's see. Can I set it? Did it do it? No, I don't see it doing it. Okay, well, I'll keep trying on that. But here we go. Brian is watching. Question 1. Should an old preacher be concerned about the new lax dress approach in preaching and teaching? Preachers teaching and preaching with ball caps on, especially on podcasts, and the wearing of bibs. I contrast that with the dress of the senators in the current hearings in the Senate. Seems some have more respect for that place than the presence of God.
Oh,
I heard ball caps. What was the rest of it?
he said, Dave won't get close to the mic. He's scared of it.
My mic and your mic are two very different things.
He said, what about the lax approach to, he's been watching some videos, preachers putting on videos. Some of them wearing ball caps and bibs. What's bibs?
Bib overalls, I guess.
Oh, really?
I don't know. He put
Yeah.
bibs in quotations marks.
Huh.
Yeah, bib overalls.
I got some bib overalls. I didn't know we should wear that.
I haven't worn them in a long time, and I preached at a place where 3/4 of the men wore them on Sunday, but they were pressed and they had white dress shirts. But I'm kind of in the middle on this anymore. I don't think a fellow ought to wear a ball cap in the house anyway. Period. But I used to be a pretty much of a stick in the mud about appearance, and I still think brethren ought to dress in a way that is commensurate with the circumstances. But we got a lot of poor people we're trying to reach. We've got a lot of uneducated people, and I mean that by they're just unsophisticated as far as what customs have been. I mean, the world is just completely changed. And
let's ask Ed. He's younger than we are.
Okay, yeah, maybe so.
Ed, what about this? Should we dress better? I have seen some of these preachers that are preaching or on the video, Facebook or whatever these days with ball caps, and I think I did see one guy wearing overalls. What about it?
Well,
Should
there's several things to consider. One, personally, every time that I'm behind the pulpit, I think that I ought to wear a coat and a tie, and I'd like for everybody to do that. But that's not me as not being the law. I'm not the authority. I had and what Jeff said, that one should dress, according to the occasion. That pendulum can swing the other way, because I have heard some here tell me that that's why they wear the yoga pants, because they're going to go and do yoga. That's for the occasion. It looks silly if they wore something else. So, then we get to the modest apparel there that Paul addresses with Timothy. But I have seen, and I see quite often on Facebook, a brother who dresses in overalls, and he sometimes is driving in his pickup. Other times he's standing outside. Brother Gardner Hall up in New Jersey stands outside, and does his podcast. Maybe this gentleman is referring to those type of teachings, folks that are doing podcasting and just teaching wherever they might be. There's been a few times that I have podcasted right out of Waffle House. But inside the church building, behind the pulpit, I think we just need to dress in a respectful manner, not something that's going to draw attention to us. If we dress in such a way to draw attention to ourselves, we are violating Scripture. And one more thing, I preached a meeting in Southern California a few years ago, and a lot of people went in flip-flops to church. That's the way they dressed.
I remember something you said a long time ago, John. Our brethren just don't have any couth anymore.
That's right.
You know, we just lost. I mean, just from a practical standpoint, okay. I mean, I'm in business. I've been in business. One of the fundamental principles of public speaking is that the speaker ought to dress at least a notch up above the audience, just simply because he commands respect and draws attention to the importance of what's going on. So that's generally been the custom that I have observed. Like you, I wear a coat and a tie. And generally in the congregation here, we encourage the men to wear a coat or a tie when they are up publicly participating in the service. The other thing is that anybody who knows anything that's read the studies, the casual movement has caused a lot of problems in the workplace. It affects productivity, it affects collegiality, it affects decorum in the workplace. And most businesses are going back to a more formal dress for their workplace. I think we ought to recognize, schools recognize that behavior is better when people dress to a standard. So to suggest that we ought to have some kind of standard is not out of the question, especially based on biblical principles. But if somebody's going to say, well, am I going to make a law and say that this fellow who's wearing a pair of bib overalls can't teach? Well, that's ridiculous because, I mean, I've been in the boat fishing and done some of my best teaching at that moment as far as getting the job done. So we've got to recognize that there's some common sense involved in all of this. But I kind of am suspect of these guys. The narcissism of our age is just driving me crazy. And people calling attention to themselves and making their brand and their trademark and all of that. And I don't know. Some of that's just over the top to me.
It's the millennials that are ruining us.
Yes, it is. That's who it is.
All right. I appreciated the question in the sense that the question was talking about preachers.
Yes.
And I think to some extent that you need to show a respect for your audience. Yes, you might appeal more to the casual crowd, but there's a lot of people who come to church that are kind of turned off for that. You know, can't you respect the Lord any better than that? Why don't you dress up? I wouldn't address it necessarily to our members. Ed knows, Ed's preached a lot. Like he says, Southern California, other places. He knows about High School Road. We do have a lot of poor people at High School Road. And they just don't wear, excuse me, Dave. I'm facing these guys and they just want me to face the camera here. They just don't have the money, or a lot of them don't have the tradition, if you will, of dressing in a suit and tie. Mm-hmm. That's almost sort of foreign to them. I've fussed at a couple of them and say, what do you wear to work? Well, pretty well the same thing. But anyway, okay. Engineer Dave, what's next?
You got a few comments on this subject, and
all right.
This is from Gerald. What about preachers who are 50 pounds overweight but are dressed to the hilt and care more about appearances than the truth?
Gerald, that's
talking to someone else, not to me.
Gerald, that's a multiple question.
What does he have in mind?
Wait a minute. He 50 pounds overweight. That's kind of knocking at my door, and dressed to the nines. That's a whole different thing. And false teachers, that was number 3. I'm not sure all 3 of those.
False teachers.
I'm not sure all 3 of those necessarily go with one another. But yeah, that would be repulsive for a man to behave in that fashion. You said you've got other comments.
Okay. New topics.
Were there other comments on this one? You implied.
Well,
multiple.
Gerald also said God's concern is for the contents of your heart.
That's true, but Gerald, that's the contents of your heart are sometimes reflected in what you wear,
Or how you speak.
or how you speak, or how you behave yourself, comport yourself. For instance, you know the parable about the man who came to the wedding feast and didn't have on a wedding garment. He was reflecting something in his heart about the occasion. There might be other comments that you could make along that line, but what you wear is not necessarily devoid of a reflection of what's in your heart. Next.
Okay, this one's from Brian. He says, "Does Edward have the ability to talk?" That was earlier in the broadcast. He says, "Who is the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament? Not just any angel, but the angel of the Lord."
I just actually worked on that this week.
Okay. Who's the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament?
Yeah, that here I was. Let's see, where is that?
You got
This
this,
was
Ed?
interesting.
Go ahead.
There's a really good article, and I'll share it with you guys later. I've got it in my files, but we of course, angel of the Lord is prominent in Genesis and Exodus and following, but we've been reading about it. But here, the angel of the Lord appeared to Hagar. He appeared to Abraham. He appeared to Balaam. He appeared to Manoah. He appeared to King David, or at least in connection with the census. He appeared to Sennacherib, or was involved in the slaughter of the 185,000. He appeared to Zechariah, or at least mentioned twice in the visions of Zechariah. And then David mentions him again in Psalm 34, or the psalmist, I guess I should say. But every one of those passages I just suggested to you, every one of them has a direct bearing on some messianic application. And then when you talk about whether or not the angel of the Lord is a divine person, in other words, the question usually is the angel of the Lord Jesus or the Word. Consider the following. The angel of the Lord claimed to be divine in Exodus chapter 3. He was addressed as deity in Genesis and Judges by Hagar and Manoah. He was accorded divine honors there in Exodus 3. Take off your shoes for you're on holy ground. Likewise in Genesis 22. The Old Testament writers called him God, example there in Exodus 3 and verse 4. He seems to have had divine attributes. This is the one that really struck me. Exodus 23:20. Let's see if I can find that.
Ed,
Yes, sir.
while he's looking for that, why don't you
I'm sorry.
go ahead?
I send my angel before thee to keep thee away and to bring thee into the place where I have prepared. I send my angel before thee, he says, beware of him and obey his voice. Provoke him not, for he will not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him. That really is impressive. And then he promises only what God can promise. There you have him with Abraham in Genesis 21. And then he is clearly linked to the Messiah, Zechariah 12, and then again in Isaiah chapter 6. So those are some interesting points to study about the angel of the Lord. I tend to believe that he probably was the Word, or is the Word, because after the Old Testament, you never hear about the angel of the Lord again. with the definite.
Well, in Matthew 28:2, is that not the angel of the Lord?
Go ahead and read that.
Matthew 28. And behold, there was a great earthquake, and an angel of the Lord. Yeah, you're right. It doesn't say the angel of the Lord. But there's several references.
You think about Acts 8 is probably the one you're thinking about. I think the definite article appears in the English version. But as I understand it, it's not necessarily there in the Greek.
Yeah. Well, there are several references: angels of the Lord and angel of the Lord, the angel of the Lord. And I think that when it talks about the angel of the Lord, usually it seems like it is a Christophany, a theophany, Jesus, the pre-incarnate Word. It's specifically, or without a doubt in my mind, in Zechariah.
Yes, it clearly is in Zechariah. I believe you're right.
You know,
The point I would make is that in those instances, again, they're all messianic, the connections seem to be, but the fact that the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us in John 1, it seems to be the unique function of the Word to always be God's representative on earth. And when you look at these passages where the angel of the Lord appears in the Old Testament, that is a function that he is fulfilling in that context.
all righty. What you looking up there, Ed? What have you got for us?
Well, I was looking at Zechariah 3:1.
Mm-hmm.
Where it says, "Then he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to accuse him." And Zechariah 1:12 and 12:8, they all seem to be obviously messianic, and that angel of the Lord would be Christ, the pre-incarnate Word.
I have seen it.
In chapter 12, verse 8 says, "In that day the Lord will defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And the one who is feeble among them in that day will be like David, and the house of David will be like God, like the angel of the Lord before them." So there's divinity there.
I have seen it argued that those angel of the Lord references, there are some of them that are a little difficult. For instance, the appearance to Manoah, where he denies the idea of worship to him, the angel does, which makes it a little difficult. And I have seen the suggestion from some that the worship that he receives is ambassadorial, that as you would address an ambassador of the United States as the United States is here, whereas it's referring to his position, his representative position. So it's not absolutely conclusive. I tend to agree with the two of you that it is, looks like it is a reference to the Messiah or to the Word, but there's two or three of those questionable passages that you're going to have a little trouble with. Okay, Engineer Dave.
I'm getting a few comments. One from Gloria, who says Matthew 1:20 and Matthew 2 verse 13.
I looked at that. In fact, I remember this lady, and she and I talked about that just the other day. But Matthew 1:20 says, "While he thought on these things, the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a dream, saying, Joseph, thou son of David." This, of course, the King James. You fellows were saying it doesn't ever say King, the angel of the Lord. But anyway, you also have it again in verse 24. "Joseph, being raised from sleep, did as the angel of the Lord had bidden him, and took unto him his wife." Then in chapter 2, verse 13, "The angel of the Lord appeareth to Joseph in a dream and encourages him to run."
You're in the Old Testament, though.
What?
You're in the Old Testament. We were talking about the New Testament, the definite article. It does even appear in Acts 8, the angel of the Lord speaking to Philip. But the question is in the Hebrew, the the definite article is present, and in the Greek it may or may not be implied. That was the only point I was making.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't saying the English versions didn't say that.
Or,
It's strictly debatable. I would not deny that, and I'm not going to make it a point of faith, because if it's a point of faith, I think it'd be clear in the scriptures. But the point that Ed makes is right on target. Clearly in Zechariah, that angel of the Lord is foreshadowing Christ. There's no doubt about that. And the whole point of that vision is the redemptive work of Christ.
all righty.
I was reading other translations there for Matthew 1:20, and they all, for the most part, use an angel of the Lord instead of the angel.
The angel, that's why I pointed out it was King James.
And I was looking at a few Spanish translations, and they use the an angel of the Lord.
All righty.
Spanish translation's usually pretty good on that stuff.
Let me
Yes.
go through what Jeff has just explained to you a little bit. Again, what he's saying is that in Greek, the definite article, the, a, an, whatever, is usually implied. It's not necessarily translatable. It's not as definite as it is in our language, and it's not definite like it is in the Old Testament in Hebrew. So these New Testament passages are not necessarily contradicting the Old Testament. There were angels, other angels, and they are angels of the Lord. So it's hard to identify these as the same character angel that's in the Old Testament. Go ahead, Engineer Dave.
I had another comment from Gerald mentioning James. It's just a passage. James 2:1-5.
James 2:1-5. Oh, this is back to our dress and attire. Ed, what about that?
Well, yeah, I was thinking. I think I saw that in one of the comments here. When Joseph was told to come out of the dungeon and go see the Pharaoh, he changed his appearance from a raggedy clothes. He shaved his head and just put new clothes on to go see the king. Somebody on that comment thread made that point, and that is true. He dressed his best to go see the king, and might have meant also that he was ready for the next role in his life. Now, what about James 2? What's the question?
James 2, let me read it, and I'll have you comment on it. My brethren, have not the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of go with respect of persons. For if there come into your assembly a man with a gold ring and goodly apparel, and there come in also a poor man in vile raiment, and ye have respect to him that weareth the gay clothing, that's King James, and say unto him, sit thou here in a good place, say to the poor, stand thou here, sit here under my footstool, are ye not then partial in yourselves and become judges of evil thoughts? And perhaps the idea I'm sure he's trying to relate to is, here's a fellow in a suit and tie and dressed up in his bib and tucker, and you show preference to him over the guy who comes in a T-shirt advertising a rock band. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are that the Apostle Paul addressed this there in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 on the Lord's Supper. There were some that were poor, some that were wealthy, and they made a distinction as class distinction, social distinction. James chapter 2, I think, is talking about the same thing, about the class distinctions, that we're not supposed to be partial to anyone. If me dressing in a coat and tie on Sunday morning is going to make the poor feel inadequate, and I'm aware of that, then I need to dress differently. Be sensitive to those needs and to those emotions. If that's what Joel's getting at, I'm not sure he just gave us James 2:1-5.
I suspect that's it.
But I do feel that we could be tempted to treat those that look like us, dress like us, differently than those that don't.
That goes
And
both ways.
that would be a sin.
That goes both ways. And that's one of the things that I think that some of these fellows who are so rampant on, this is always the argument they run to. Well, you're making class distinctions. Well, no, you're making class distinctions. You're judging me and making a judgment about me that I think I'm better than somebody else just because I wear a tie. Mm-hmm. And the truth of the matter is that some of these outfits that these guys wear cost far more than anything I have in my closet, and they still look like they just rolled out of bed and haven't walked in front of the mirror.
You guys need to I know you will, but you need to come to High School Road. We've gotten to where we're so multicultural. We have a couple of members that show up all the time in native African dress.
But they're doing exactly what we're talking about here. They're showing their respect.
Yes, that's absolutely.
That's the point.
Absolutely.
They're not trying to draw attention to themselves. It might seem a little stark to those of us who've never seen that, but they're doing what we're talking about. They're trying to show their respect by coming in the best that they have, and they think in their cultural paradigm, that is what they should do.
Yeah. In fact, we're kind of...
That's what we're trying to get people to understand, is that when we come before God, we come before Him in our dress, in our minds, in our disposition, however you want to describe, knowing that's where we're going, into the presence of the King.
In fact, we're praying for one of those brethren now who's about to come back from Nigeria. He's been over there for a couple of months visiting family. He's a terrific Bible student, and I hope he gets back safely. I hope he can bring his wife with him. She's having some problems getting the visa over, along with a lot of other people, I guess. Ed, you were looking pensive.
May I interject here?
Sure.
Yes,
interject
please.
away.
The book of Leviticus, it's that book that during our yearly Bible reading we get to it and want to skip over or just gloss over because it gets boring, a lot of rules and regulations. But I think that the book itself is teaching us when he says, you take this animal, you put your hand on it, you slit its throat, very specific details. The father of the house needs to be involved, the kids need to be involved, everyone needs to be. I think the point of Leviticus is that God wants holiness, but he wants the wholeness of holiness. In other words, not just my words or not just my actions. As somebody pointed out, he wants the heart. But when we give God the heart, we're going to give him everything else. And I think that's the main point of Leviticus. He wants wholeness of holiness. And when we come to the New Testament, yeah, we're under the law of liberty, we're under the law of grace. But that does not negate the fact that I still need to give my best to the Lord in every circumstance. And now I'm coming to the house of worship to exalt the name of the Lord, to praise the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, to partake of the emblems. Is not something that is nonchalant. It's not a casual thing. It's not a trick or trunk time. It's something holy. And we should be dressed in such a way that we're expressing to God our holiness.
All righty. Engineer Dave, what's up?
Were these the difficult questions you all were waiting for Ed to come on for?
That's right.
If you're ready for a new topic.
Okay, go ahead.
You know what? Wait a minute. There's another comment that's come in. This one's from Brian about this subject that you're talking about. Put the focus on the ball cap or a hat on the head when praying, teaching, or preaching. Is that suitable?
Okay. These guys have probably worn out their larynx just a little bit. I would encourage you, and I think Brian is probably trying to call attention to 1 Corinthians, the 11th chapter. And it has been a tradition, I think, in this country based on 1 Corinthians 11. Perhaps maybe a misinterpretation of it to some extent, but at least it is a tradition. I praise you, brethren, that you remembered all keep the ordinances I delivered to you. I would have you know the head of every man is Christ, the head of the woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. Every man praying or prophesying and his head covered dishonoreth his head. And that's what I think Brian's trying to get at. it is, I think this passage says dishonorable. I think it is certainly, even the military will take off their covering, whatever it is, their cap or hat, when they go inside a building. And I think Jeff or somebody made a comment earlier. To me, it is just awful to see a young man, maybe a preacher, who hasn't been taught that when you are praying or prophesying, you don't wear that hat. You show some respect. Now, that may be a misunderstanding of this passage. We can go into a discussion of 1 Corinthians 11 some other time. But it has been a long-standing tradition in this country that men do not wear a hat in a building. And I think that perhaps that tradition drawn from this passage to some extent, whether rightly or wrongly. And it's just bad form. It's like, didn't your mama teach you any table manners? And
We're back to that couth. We're back to that couth.
Couth. And so, I can understand. Here's an ignoramus who doesn't know anything. That's one thing, but we're talking about preachers who are, it gets me so irritated. My sons wear ball caps all the time, and I just kind of go ballistic when they sit down at the table and forget to take off one of the other ones. Engineer Dave, one of the other ones, sit down at the dinner table wearing that ball cap. Didn't your mama teach you anything? So, anyway, go ahead now. What's next?
Okay. There's not necessarily a question in here, but I think he meant it as a question, so I'm going to read it as he said it.
Okay.
This is from Larry. In the burning bush passage, God sent Moses to lead, not Aaron, who was the better spokesman. God made no mistake, as this golden calf making shows Aaron did not have the character to lead.
Okay, I think that's a good point. Moses was obviously the leader. Aaron was only involved because Moses maybe was a little scared and made excuses, which we all know about. Go ahead.
Well, and then Aaron and Miriam wanted to overthrow Moses.
Yeah.
And then Moses made a mistake when he lost his cool. It should be a leadership problem.
Yeah.
It was just God's plan to choose Moses.
Yes. Go ahead. What else you got? Oh, that was it?
Well, okay. Ed had mentioned it. I didn't get to the comment fast enough, but Larry also commented, and this is the context of what he said. When Joseph was summoned by Pharaoh, he shaved and changed. It shows some thought towards appearance in Joseph coming to Pharaoh. So therefore, should we not have thought before appearing before the King of Kings?
Yeah, I think so. The problems, some of the problems that you have, I remember worshiping with a fellow some time ago who all week long he worked in an office, and he wore a suit and tie every day at the office. And yet he would come waltzing into church with some ratty, wasn't even a sweater. It was wasn't a t-shirt. It was a, sweatshirt. Yeah, a sweatshirt. Maybe advertising some rock band, maybe some ball team. And I'm kind of like, well, you dress respectfully every day at work, and you come worship the Lord looking like a slob, like you just wandered in out of bed. That was disrespectful. That is not the same thing as the poor man who can't afford any better. It's not the same thing as the cultural issue where we have people in this country who, number one, they can't afford it. Number two, they don't know they should. And by the way, in terms of teaching the gospel, that's not the first thing I'm going to teach them. There's
That's
a lot.
right.
There's a lot of other stuff to teach them first, and then when they've learned all of that, and I hadn't learned it all yet, maybe we can begin to talk about how we need to dress a little better at church.
I think that's what Matthew 28 teaches in the Great Commission, and then teach them these other things.
Yeah. So anyway, go ahead.
You know, this is just my little side comment. I always liked when you went to Nigeria, that back several years ago now, you put pictures of Nigerians who had on the best looking garments.
Oh,
And at the same time, you're thinking, you know, these people are poor, and yet they are wearing splendid outfits to church.
it was just, you know, I've told this before. I did go to Nigeria, went to Uganda. I felt so out of place. The goofy boy, there were certainly hundreds of people more qualified than I was to be over there, but it was such a cultural shock. I was in, when I first got there, I was in Lagos, an enormous city, and just poor, awful. It was awful. I remember we went out to church, to the meeting, and we went up a dirt road, a city street that had open sewers on both sides. We walked across a plank to get across the sewer to get over to a concrete block building with just slab benches in it. In walking into there, I walked past a dead rat. And I got in, so, you know, and that's kind of opens your eyes. But I got in there, and those people, the building was just stuffed, packed with people. All of them dressed in their native clothing, dressed to the nines. And they started singing. They sing in English, and I cried and cried and still cry when I think about it. These people loved the same Lord I did, and it didn't matter where or what, they were singing praise. And they were respectful, not for the beauty of the building or the loveliness of the situation, but for the Lord they were worshiping. And that was true everywhere I went. These people had respect, and some of them were poor, absolutely poorer than we know about. So that's just my thoughts. I thought I should be letting you guys talk. And Ed, you've probably seen more than I have in Latin America.
I would like to add a couple of things, if you don't mind. We can become legalistic when it comes to dressing for church. You know, I was reading there in 1 Corinthians 11, what you mentioned, in reference to the woman. It mentions makes a comment that does not nature even itself teach you. I've always been of the opinion that the nature is talking about there is that what's around you should tell you how to dress or how to conduct yourselves or dress. So in some other countries, men wear the yarmulkes when they worship God or wherever they go. They have their head covered. So are we going to tell them that's a sin when they pray? Because, you know, our reading of 1 Corinthians 11 is telling us that a man can't have his head covered when he prays. But I believe that the passage itself is teaching us nature should dictate what's acceptable and not acceptable as far as that is concerned, not necessarily modest. And then verse 16 says, but if anyone is inclined to be contentious, neither we or the churches of God have such custom.
All righty.
And that's where I usually leave it.
All righty. What time have I got? I got time. You sure there's nothing else? We got a couple of minutes. Whoever it is better be quick.
You did. Oh my! Actually, several things came in all of a sudden. All right. Gerald says, I once saw a church leader tell a man who had cancer to remove his cap inside an air-conditioned building. Because of his condition, he was unable to comply. Same church leader escorted the man out, and unfortunately, the man passed 2 days later.
Escorted him out?
I guess.
Oh my!
Every situation is different, should be handled in all consideration, which I think is what we've been saying.
Yeah.
And then the wife of the man in the story has spent the last 12 years teaching and working with a congregation of people in Africa, where clothing is seldom the subject of conversation. Brian says, thank you, John. Been there, done that in my efforts in India.
Okay.
Lucy says, keep up the good work. And then this is from John. From Matthew 6:16 through 18. This may be a new topic.
Okay, go ahead. We're going to hurry.
The Pharisees wanted to appear humble. No, I don't think it is. The Lord condemned their hypocrisy and told the people to wash up and anoint their head. Just thought this might also apply to this conversation. It's not a new topic.
Jeff, what about that? Matthew 6.
Well, he's talking about fasting there, and it goes back to the point that Ed made earlier. I mean, we can turn dress into something that it's not intended to be, and that's usually where this discussion ends up. Yeah. Trying to impute a position to somebody that's just not the thing. It's not valid. Why can't people just understand that we're going to worship God? And we need to act like it. We need to prepare for it. We need to, if you really think that God wear your flip-flops and your short shorts or to come into his presence, then all right, there's not a thing in the world I can say to you that's going to change your mind. That's just it. Is that how you want to come before God? Do you not realize that he's there? He's in our midst. The children of Israel didn't come before God like that. If you don't learn anything else from the Old Testament, you learn about the awesomeness, the holiness, the transcendence of God.
All righty. That's good. Tell us about the church in Nacogdoches. When do y'all meet?
We meet tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. And we're studying the book of Leviticus on Wednesday nights. And we welcome you in there simply. I'm not teaching, but Jay's doing a good job.
How is Harshberger, the preacher there? Is he'd broken a leg or something?
He's in Ethiopia right now. Actually, he's probably headed home today.
Okay.
And he's been over there a month. He's doing well as far as his hip was concerned, and his myasthenia gravis has not bothered him very much the last couple of months. So I'm anxious to see how he fared on the trip, though. They're usually very hard trips.
Okay, Randy Harshberger. Tell us again about the church in Hueytown, Ed.
We are at 2053 High School Road in Hueytown, hueytownchurchofchrist.org. More information. And Wednesday, tomorrow at 7 p.m., we're studying several things. You can choose from Revelation, James, Jeremiah, Christian attitudes, Genesis, heroes to zeros. A lot of classes going on.
Heroes. How about zeros to heroes?
actually, it's zeros and heroes of the Old Testament.
Ed,
and then we start at 9:30 on Sundays.
If you follow Ed on Facebook, I know he puts a lot of his sermons on Facebook. Right?
Yes, sir.
Is there some other site they can look to for that?
Well, if people just go to hueytownchurchofchrist.org, everything's connected.
All righty.
And you can go listen to a sermon called "Tugging at Your Phylacteries" if you want to know a little bit more about parish.
All righty. This program brought to you by the High School Road Church of Christ, 3103 North High School Road in Indianapolis. We're going to meet tomorrow night at 7:30. The adult class in English is going to be studying 1 Peter 5, and there was also an adult class in Spanish. Classes for all ages, of course. Brother Andres Pong will be teaching that. On the Lord's Day, another class in Spanish at 9:30, an adult class at 9:30. He is studying in Galatians, and then I believe in the 4th chapter. And then at 9:30, a worship service, and again at 6 in the evening, another worship service. 3103 North High School Road in Indianapolis, not Hueytown. So it's good to have you two gentlemen with us today. It's good to be with
Thank
all
you.
of you folks. And if the Lord wills, we'll be back with you again next week. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.